Hello, AC Keeble here. It's Charlie as usual, and for this video I'm doing a special commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the commemoration of the Holocaust. It was on this day in 1945 that Auschwitz was liberated and the Holocaust came to an end. The story of the Holocaust has been largely affected by the Jews of the world, as they were the biggest, they amounted to the biggest number of victims that were killed in the Shoah. Now, although the Jews dominate the story of the Holocaust, I happen to know of a smaller but less well-known story that happened during the Holocaust that affected the disabled people. In fact, the story of autism has its origins also in the Holocaust as well. For the commemoration and recognition of the disabled community and the autism community from the Holocaust, I've decided to make this video to tell of its story. I've written a speech here and I'd like to read it to you. This is a moment of reflection on the darkest days in human history. It is one of the most awful and depressing genocides of the 20th century, and it's affected everyone of us deeply. The Jews of Europe were the biggest community targeted by the Nazis, and they made up the largest share of the victims killed in the Holocaust. There was also other groups of people killed in the Holocaust before the Shoah even began. I'm one of those groups, and they were the disabled people, dismissed by the Nazis as impure, defective creatures that were a burden on the state. I would like to tell the tale of the disabled in the Holocaust about the case of Hans Asperger, the Austrian doctor that discovered the high-functioning form of autism that I have. As an actual autistic and an advocate, I want to share the story of the racial hygiene policy that the Nazis instigated to eliminate the disabled. To honour their deaths, I come here as a representative of the disabled community. The disabled were amongst the first to be killed in the Holocaust before the gas chambers and the death camps were built. The disabled were killed behind closed doors right in the heart of the German cities and towns on a much smaller scale, but their deaths were every bit as significant. The disabled were used as experiments for the killing machines and methods used on the Jews much later in Auschwitz. The Holocaust is also relevant in the history of neurodiversity and autism because Hans Asperger discovered this condition during the time of the rise of fascism in Europe. In 1931, Asperger was a postgraduate paediatrician at the University of Vienna's teaching hospital. He studied a number of children in his care and noticed that they had some interesting conditions about their behaviour and their intellectual abilities. These children had a condition that was not fully understood and largely dismissed by the medical profession. Asperger was curious and did not reject them, but sought to understand them, even though there were difficulties in communication and too awkward to interact with their peers. One of these children was a boy called Gottfried that was referred to him by his colleagues. Gottfried was a gifted and intelligent boy, but he was incapable of behaving appropriately in public. Asperger took an interest in Gottfried and tested to see how he responded to rules and routine. Gottfried was given some pictures to put into a story, but he couldn't imagine how to craft these pictures into a visual story unless he was given text to read and put the pictures together. In another test, Gottfried was shown a path through a forest and was fixated on the trees and was able to name and make details of every tree that was there. This high intelligence struck a chord with Asperger, even though Gottfried couldn't create a story together with the pictures. Asperger then turned his attention to other children and noticed similar patterns in their behaviour. Nearly all of them were unable to interact socially with each other, but had high levels of intelligence in their abilities. Asperger called this intellectual condition autistic psychopathy. In the midst of the Nazis' rise to power in Germany, Asperger's received little acknowledgement from the medical establishment. There was no circulation of research papers because at the time he started to publish his work, his home country was cut off from the outside world when Hitler annexed Austria in 1938. It wasn't until British psychiatrist Lorna Wynne studied his work in the 1980s that Asperger's work was recognised by the world. Later, the high-function form of autism that he studied was named in his honour as Asperger's syndrome, of which is the part of the autistic spectrum that I'm on. Back in Vienna in 1934, the Nazis started to take over the city and began implementing their reign of terror. They started by circulating literature about the purity of National Socialism and the case for eugenics. This included full-page spreads in the newspapers with mental patients as grinning idiots and zombie-like lunatics, with frustrated doctors being strained under the burden of caring for these people. Posters were put up showing people how much money in state welfare it costs for a disabled person to live, stating that it costs 60,000 Reichsmarks for each individual, and that amount of money would be better spent on the well-being of healthy Germans. The Nazis believed that eugenics, as well as anti-Semitism, would create the perfect society of Aryanism. The Jews may have been their prime target, but they were also instigating a racial hygiene policy. Later, this policy became known as Action T4, which involved eliminating and destroying the disabled, including the children with the kind of autistic psychopathy that Hans Asperger had discovered. Sterilisation on the disabled was carried out in secret by the state institutions to stop them from breeding. This was part of a plan to prevent hereditary diseases and conditions from being passed on to future generations. The Nazis' control over diversity of thought meant that intelligence and usefulness was judged only worthy of existence, providing they were Aryan. As well as shutting down universities in Poland and controlling the academics in Austria, they made sure that Aryan creativity and genius was the only kind permitted in the Reich. The Nazis thought they were supreme in their intellect, but they were dismissing the work and greatness of others. It is often said that had the Jewish scientists that invented quantum physics not been expelled or killed, then they may have been able to build the atomic weapons that Germany needed to win the war. But thankfully, that never happened. Asperger's children could have been saved had their brilliant and beautiful minds been recognised by the Nazis. In the time that he was studying them, he remarked that they were remarkable creatures with beautiful minds. Asperger paid extensive attention to those children who had special abilities in science and art. One boy had an extensive knowledge of complex machinery and would daydream about fantastic inventions long before they were invented. Another boy, called Helmuth, was a recluse and an awkward conversationalist. His only subject that he was capable of talking about was poetry, and he was able to talk in detail about poems and sonnets that was eloquent and original. Asperger christened this distinctive characteristic autistic intelligence. He summed it up by saying, "It seems that for success in science or art, a dash of autism is essential." Asperger saw so much value in these autistic children, but the Nazis did not see them as anything good other than their flaws, just as they did for any other disabled person, for that matter. To them, they were horrid and hideous creatures that were pathetic to be seen in public and should be hidden away or destroyed. They even influenced the members of the faculty at the hospital and the university to commit legalised euthanasia to wipe out mental defectives off the face of the earth. When I first heard about this, it was horrifying and shocking to read about. A genocide of people like me is akin to murdering a child just because it isn't perfect in the eyes of its parents. As an autistic living in a democratic country, I have more hope than what these people had in Nazi Vienna. I often wonder if there was any hope for sanctuary or survival of autistics living in the midst of savages and murderous civil servants. When the war came along, the disabled found themselves to be subjected to even more torture. While Auschwitz was under construction, the disabled people living in state-run nursing homes and hospital institutions became guinea pigs for the systematic extermination of the Jews in the death camps. They were the first to be murdered using lethal gases like Zyklon B and carbon monoxide, a method that would later be used en masse to kill the inmates at Auschwitz. After they were cremated, their carers were told to report to their families that they had died of natural causes. The relatives of the victims were given notes telling them where they went, but never revealed how they died. Hans Asperger and every other doctor in Austria found themselves as servants of their Nazi overlords. In 1935, the medical establishment was Aryanised by the Nazis, and the members were made to take loyalty oaths to the Führer or retired. Asperger among them. It's not known if he actually took the oath to the Führer, but he wouldn't have been able to keep his job if he hadn't. His mentor, Hans Hamburger, looked out for him, and he was able to keep him from being arrested by watching over him. Privately, Asperger rebelled against his masters and made sure that some of the autistic children survived. Asperger never gave up on his children and made sure that his staff never gave up on them. He believed that autism was sacrosanct genius and that some of the great creators, thinkers, scientists and artists were autistic as well. He told his colleagues that the positive and negative qualities of autism are two natural, necessary, connected aspects of one well-knit, harmonious personality. The communication and social difficulties of autistic children is the price they pay for their special gifts. Their strengths and capacities will be valuable to them as they grow older. By helping these autistics to their full potential, his colleagues will be benefiting society as a whole, a concept that eugenicists could not support. One of Asperger's former colleagues, Erwin Jacalius, was very supportive of eugenics, believing that the disabled were so useless to society that they were more useful to the medical world as guinea pigs for medical science. Jacalius was a high-ranking Nazi Austrian doctor who ran a clinic called Spiegelgrund that was a centre for the elimination of children like Gottfried and Helmuth. The Nazis declared punishments for people who dared to infect their society with disablement and called upon parents that it was their solemn duty to bring any of their children that had defects to be brought to the Spiegelgrund clinic to be put to sleep. One of Hitler's doctors, Theo Morell, mentioned that the loss of a disabled child was necessary to protect the Reich, stating that these creatures aroused horror in normal people, sapping the morale of the nation that was needed for war. As part of the Achion C4 program, some of the children were used as specimens for experimental drugs to treat and cure pneumonia, skin diseases, and chronic illnesses. Reading about this dark, disturbing moment in history for me was horrifying. Just to hear about systematic destruction of gifted but mentally impaired people like that. What Asperger tried to do for them was to save them by highlighting remarkable talents to fascists and eugenicists that they were worthy of existence and not an imperfection to be cured. What needs to be recognised here is that although our Maker made us all unequal to each other, we should accept and embrace all classes of citizens. The Nazis saw it that all the people in their world should be conformed and uniform to one another. As an autistic, I feel like I have lost many great minds that were different to mine in the spectrum of neurodiversity. The autistic community was valued by Hans Asperger, and I wish he had lived long enough to see the appreciation of what autism advocates like me had become. To most people, the Holocaust was a genocide that almost wiped out the Jews of Europe. Of the 6 million people killed in the Holocaust, 270,000 of them were disabled people, most of which were killed by being put to death in the clinics, hospitals or nursing homes by euthanasia and experimentation. One valuable lesson that I, as an actual autistic advocate, have learned from this is that autism is an essential ingredient in making the world a better place. Asperger believed that people like me should use my own autism to openly express my identity and my intellectual usefulness. Asperger would be proud today to see that the autistic community has flourished across the globe. Although far from perfect, we do have a lot of work to do. I co-support the autism movement with political activism to fight for the civil rights of neurodiversity and the right of self-determination for autistics in their own country. As I stand here in solidarity with the Jewish community in commemoration of the Holocaust, I extend my support and admiration for the Jews. They have a number of things in common with autistics of the world, and I extend that admiration to the autism support structure in Israel. One of those things is that opposite of what anti-Semites think of them. They call the Jews rich and powerful puppet masters of the world. I think of the Jews as an inventive, invincible and indomitable people that lead the world in technological and social progress. And so it has come to pass. On this Holocaust Memorial Day, I hope that you will remember that the Shoah was not just a means to try and exterminate Judaism from the face of the earth, but also to eliminate the bright ideas and imaginations of people with beautiful minds. I'm a proud and open autistic person, and I'm glad to say that I value all forms of life wherever we go. We must understand the concept of equality and value all the types of people in this world so that we may all live in mutual harmony with each other. This video has been brought to you by Charlie Keeble, the Autistic Conservative, and I hope that you will continue to follow my adventures and subscribe to this blog, ackeeble.co.uk, and click the link to follow my YouTube channel. Thank you. Goodbye.